Alrighty, sorry about the delay. Welcome back to another installment of Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we're going to be reading more of The Lazarus Effect by Bill Ransom and Frank Herbert. Previously on, the plot started moving. Bushka is now complicit in killing Guemes Island. Um, and by Gellar Gallo and his cabal, which are named the Green Dashers collectively, who are up to something, some sort of drastic political change. We've learned that the Mermen are seeking to control the kelp as they bring it back to life, um, which they've kind of implied before, but now it's pretty explicit. Um, we don't know how that factors into Gellar Gallo's plans. Certainly, shooting rockets into space into orbit to collect hype tanks that ship left behind is in some way part of his plans, but we don't know how they fit in just yet. We do know that his opinions of islanders are execrable and not exactly open-minded. Let's see. Ward Keel and Kareen Ale. I think I spelled her name correctly in the stream description. Stream description. Um, I still haven't typed that out on the Discord, showing the dramatis personae. I have to get around to doing that at some point. Anyway, they're having to toss the political hot potato that is the Mermen sending up um, rockets without the express consent and permission and blessing of the CeePee, the chaplain psychiatrist Simone Roxack, who, incidentally, is from Guemes, the island that got taken down. So we'll see how that winds up bouncing off. And Brett has been swept off out to sea after trying to rescue Queets Twisp's boat. Um, so good luck to him. He'll need it. I think that's most of the major stuff that happened last week. Um, I realize I could just go into these without doing a recap, but the recap actually helps me a bit remember where we are in the plot. Um, Particularly if it's a book that I haven't read recently, and even if it is one, so that I remember, oh, certain events haven't happened yet, so I don't spoil things, basically. Um, I think that's it. So it will unfortunately be kind of a low energy stream this week, um, for reasons. I'm a little under the weather, but we will get some reading done. It's not going to be a terribly long one either, I don't think, but it'll be a fair chunk of pages. Uh, Anything else? Oh, we get a new major development. Yes, yes, yes. Right off rip, we're going to be doing things, seeing places, experiencing new experiences. I will admit a lot of this book is comparatively humdrum in terms of its pacing. Like, you're not having wild revelations slapped at you every couple pages, but it is. We're going places. We are going places, and it is necessary in order to get to the ascension factor. And it still feels like a respectable sequel to the Jesus incident, as hard as it is to make a sequel to something like that. But I think they did a pretty good job of it in terms of, oh, it is probably the most climactic and dramatic of the entire series. Um, and it's kind of right in the beginning. So everything, very little is going to top. Oh, by the way, not only is the spaceship that brought us here actual God actually taking people from like alternate timelines of Earth and bringing them to this place, and then giving us like inscrutable questions or ineffable questions that we have to answer for ourselves, uh, with the caveat that if we don't figure our stuff out, it's going to delete us, maybe, um, from memory. It's hard to top that. That's a thing. The ascension factor will actually feel. I feel like the ascension factor feels like the actual sequel, whereas this is the necessary legwork to get to the ascension factor. Um, you'll see what I mean, I think, when we get there, um, and I might change my opinion on that eventually. I don't know. Where was I? Yeah, I'm a little out of it right now. So we're going to get rocking and rolling now with the next segment, because it's not divided into chapters. I mean, it is, but they are not numbered chapters. Each chapter, in quotes, starts with a quote. That's how you know it's a chapter. Also, the long air gap I'll have as I'm chugging down water. I am sorry for the person, to the person who asked on one of the absolution ones, hey, I think there's a gap here. There wasn't actually a gap there. It is just that abrupt a transition. But the amount of dead air that was there is totally my fault, because I was like, oh, glug, 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 trying to get as much water down my throat as I could, and then probably hacking it up. And then, so it's like 30 seconds of dead air, and I'm like, ugh. It's probably a lot less than that, but it was still like, oh no. I can see why you would think that it cut off. But it does. It cuts off with a hyphen. Anyway, back to business. And good morning to you, Optical Antenna and Derpy Shark. Thanks for tuning in. They that go down to the sea in ships, that do business in great waters, these see the works of the Lord, and his wonders in the deep. The Christian Book of the Dead. As he fell from the pier, the coracle's bowline whipping. Yes, bowline. As he fell from the pier, the coracle's bowline whipping around his left ankle, Brett knew he was going under. He pumped in one quick breath before hitting the water. His hands clawed frantically for something to hold him up, and he felt Twisp's hand rasp beneath his fingers, but there was nothing to grip. The coracle, an anchor dragging him down, hit a submerged ledge of bubbly and upended, kicking him toward the center of the lagoon, and, for a moment, he thought he was saved. He surfaced about 10 meters from the pier, and, over the howl of the hooters, he heard Twisp calling to him. The island was receding fast, and Brett realized the coracle's bow line had broken free of the dockside cable. He hauled in as much air as his lungs could grab and felt the line on his ankle pull him toward the island. Doubling over under water, he tried to free himself, but the line had tangled in a knot, and his weight was enough to tug the coracle off the bubbly below the pier. He felt the line whip taut, dragging him down. A warning rocket painted the water over him bloody orange. The surface appeared flat, the momentary calm ahead of a wave wall. I'm going to reread both of those sentences because I didn't like how I emphasized them. Sorry. This happens from time to time. If this were well rehearsed, you wouldn't have to deal with this, but, well, tough. A warning rocket painted the water over him bloody orange. The surface appeared flat, the momentary calm ahead of a wave wall. Roiling water rolled him, the line on his ankle pulled steadily, and he felt the pressure increase through his nose and across his chest. I'm going to drown! He opened his eyes wide, amazed suddenly at the clarity of his underwater vision, even better than his night vision. Dark blues and reds dominated his surroundings. The ache in his lungs increased. He held the breath tight, not wanting to let go of that last touch with life, not wanting that first gulp of water and the choking death behind it. I always thought it would be a dasher. The first trickle of bubbles squeezed past his lips. Panic began to pulse through him. A gush of urine warmed his crotch. He twisted his head, seeing the glow of the urine against him, holding back the cold press of the sea. I don't want to die! His superb underwater vision followed the leak of bubbles upward, tracing them toward the distant surface, which was no longer a visible plain, but only a hopeless memory. In that instant, when he knew all hope was gone, a corner of his vision caught a dark flash, a flicker of shadow against shadow. He turned his head toward it and saw a woman swimming below him, her dive-suited flesh looking unclothed. She turned, something in her hand. Abruptly, the line of his ankle jerked once, then released. Merman! She rolled beneath him, and he saw her eyes, open and white against a dark face. She slipped a knife into her leg sheath while she moved upward toward him. The trickle of bubbles from his mouth became a stream, driving out of his mouth in a hot release. The woman grabbed him under an armpit, and he saw clearly that she was young and supple, superbly muscled for swimming. She rolled over him. A white flash of oxygen despair began at the back of his head. Then she slammed her mouth against his and blew the sweet breath of life down his throat. He savored it, exhaled, and again she blew a breath into him. He saw the airfish against her neck and knew she was giving him the half-used excess that her blood exuded into her lungs. It was a thing islanders heard about, a merman thing that he'd never expected to experience. She backed off, dragging him by one arm. He exhaled slowly, and again she fed him air. A merman team had been working an undersea ridge, he saw, with kelp waving high beside it and lights glowing at the rocky top, small guide markers. As panic receded, he saw that his rescuer wore a braided line around her waist with weights attached to it. The airfish trailing backward from her neck was pale and darkly veined, deep ridges along its length for external gills. It was an ugly contrast to the young woman's smooth, dark skin. His lungs ceased aching, but his ears hurt. He shook his head, pulling at an ear with his free hand. She saw the movement and squeezed his arm hard to get his attention. She plugged her nose with her fingers and mimicked blowing hard. She pointed at his nose and nodded. He copied her, and his right ear popped with a snap. An unpleasant fullness replaced the pain. He did it again, and the left ear went. When she gave him his next breath, she clung to him a bit longer, then smiled broadly when she broke away. A flooding sensation of happiness washed through Brett. I'm alive! I'm alive! He glanced past the airfish at the way her feet kicked so steadily, the strong flow of her muscles under the skin-tight suit. The light markers on the rocky ridge swept past. Abruptly, she pulled back on his arm and stopped him beside a shiny metal tube about 3 meters long. He saw hand grips on it, a small steering rudder, and jets. He recognized it from Hollow's, a Mermen horse. She guided his hand to one of the rear grips and gave him another breath. He saw her release a line at the nose of the device and then swing astraddle of it. She glanced backward and waved for him to do the same. He did so, locking his legs around the cold metal, both hands on the grips. She nodded and did something at the nose. Brett became conscious of a faint hum against his legs. A light glowed ahead of the woman, and something snaky extruded from the horse. She turned and brought a breather mouthpiece against his lips. He saw that she also was wearing one, and realized she was easing the double load on the airfish. Oh, she, and realized she was easing the double load the airfish had been forced to carry. The fish trailing from her neck and over his own shoulder appeared smaller, the gill ridges deeper and not as fat. Brett gripped the mouthpiece in his teeth and pushed the lip cover hard against the flesh. In by the mouth, out by the nose. Every islander had some sub-schooling and parallel training with Mermen rescue equipment. Blow, inhale. His lungs filled with rich, cool air. He felt a lurch then, and something bumped his left ankle. She wrapped his knee and pulled him closer to her back, lifting his hand grips until they formed a brace against her buttocks. He had never seen a naked woman before, and her dive suit left nothing for him to imagine. Unromantic as the situation was, he liked her body very much. The horse surged upward, then dived, and her hair streamed backward, covering the head of the airfish and flickering against his cheeks. He stared through a haze of her hair and over her right shoulder, feeling the water tumble around them. Far down the tunneling shadows of the sea, past the smooth shoulder, he saw a dazzling play of lights, uncounted lights, big ones, small ones, wide ones. Shapes began to grow visible, walls and towers, fine planes of platforms, dark passages and caves. The lights became Pla's windows, and he realized he was descending onto a Mermen metropolis, one of the major centers. It had to be, with that much sprawl and that much light. The dance of illumination enthralled him, feeding through his mutated vision a rapture that he had not known himself capable of feeling. A part of his awareness said this came from knowing he had survived overwhelming odds, but another part of him gloried in the new things his peculiar eyes could see. Cross currents began to turn and twist the horse. Brett had trouble holding his position. Once he lost his leg grip. His rescuer felt this and reached back to guide one of his hands around her waist. Her feet came back and locked onto his. She crouched over her controls, guiding them toward a sprawling assemblage of blocks and domes. His hands against her abdomen felt the smooth warmth there. His own clothing seemed suddenly ridiculous, and he understood the Merman preference for dive suits and undersea nudity for the first time. They wore Islander-made dive suits for long, cold work, but their skins served them well for short spurts or warmer currents. Brett's pants Yes, his pantaloons, not his panting breath. Sorry. My brain got very confused because it had read ahead and was like, what? Brett's pants chafed his thighs and cramped him, whipping in the currents of their passage. They were much closer to the complex of buildings now, and Brett began to have a new idea of the structure's sizes. The closest tower faded out of sight above them. He tried to trace it into the upper distances and realized that night had fallen topside. We can't be very far down, he thought. That tower could break the surface. But no one topside had reported such a structure. Ships save us if an island ever hits such a thing. Lights from the buildings provided him with more than enough illumination, but he wondered how his rescuer was finding her way in what he knew to be deep darkness for ordinary human vision. He saw then that she was guided by fixed lights anchored to the bottom, lanes of red and green. Even the darkest topside night had never kept him from moving around easily, but here the surface was just a faraway bruise. Brett drew a deep breath from the tube and settled himself closer to the young woman. She patted his hand on her stomach while jockeying the machine into a maze of steep-sided canyons. They rounded a corner and came onto a wide, well-lighted space between tall buildings. A dome structure loomed straight ahead with docking lips extruded from it. Many people swam in the bright illumination that glared all along the lips. Brett saw the on-off blink of a bank of hatchways opening and closing to pass the swimmers. His rescuer settled them onto a ramp with only a small sensation of grating. A merman behind them took the horse by a rear handhold. The young woman motioned for Brett to take a deep breath. He obeyed. She gently pulled the breather from him, removed her airfish, and caged it with others beside the hatch. Through the hatch they went into a chamber where the water was quickly flushed out and replaced by air. Brett found himself standing in a dripping puddle facing the young woman, who shed water as though she and her translucent suit had been oiled. "My name is Scooty Wang," she said. "What is yours?" "Brett Norton," he said. He laughed self-consciously. "You you saved my life." The statement sounded so ridiculously inadequate that he laughed again. "It was my watch for search and rescue," she said. "We're always extra alert during a wave wall if we're near an island." He had never heard of such a thing, but it sounded reasonable. Life was precious, and his view of the world said everyone felt the same, even Mermen. "You are wet," she said, looking him down and up. "Are there people who should know you are alive?" Alive! The thought made his breathing quicken. Alive! "Yes," he said. "Is it possible to get word topside?" "We'll see to it after you are settled. There are formalities." Brett noticed that she'd been staring at him much the same way he'd been intent on her. He guessed her age at close to his own, 15 or 16. She was small, small-breasted, her skin as dark as a topside tan. She stared at him calmly out of green eyes with golden flecks in them. Her pug nose gave her a gamin look, the look of wide-eyed corridor orphans back on Vachon. Her shoulders were sloping and muscular, the muscles of someone who kept in top shape. The airfish scar glowed at her neck, a livid pink against the dark wash of her wet, black hair. "You are the first islander I've ever rescued," she said. "I'm—" He shook his head, finding that he did not know how to thank her for such a thing. He finished lamely. "Where are we?" "Home," she said, with a shrug. "I live here." She dropped her ballast belt at the jerk of a knot and slung it over a shoulder. "Come with me. I'll get us both some dry clothes." He slopped after her through a hatch, his pants dripping a trail of wetness. It was cold in the long passage where the hatchway left them, but he was not too cold to miss the pleasant bounce of Scooty Wang's body as she walked away from him. He hurried to catch up. The passage was disturbingly strange to an islander, solid underfoot, solid walls lighted by long tubes of fluorescence. The walls glowed a silvery gray, broken by sealed hatches with colored symbols on them, some green, some yellow, some blue. Scooty Wang stopped at a blue-coated hatch, undogged it, and led him into a large room with storage lockers lining the sides. Benches in 4 rows took up the middle. Another hatch led out the opposite side. She opened a storage locker and tossed him a blue towel, then bent to rummage through another locker where she found a shirt and pants, holding them up while she looked at Brett. "These'll probably fit. Whoop. These'll probably fit. We can replace them later." She tossed the faded green pants onto the bench in front of him along with a matching pullover shirt. Both were a light material that Brett didn't recognize. Brett dried his face and hair. He stood there indecisively, his clothes still dripping. Mermen paid little attention to nudity, he had been told, but he was not used to being unclothed, much less in the company of a beautiful young woman. She removed her dive suit unself-consciously, found a single suit of light blue in another locker, and sat down to pull it over her body, drying herself with a towel. He stood up, looking down at her, unable to avoid staring. "How can I thank her?" he wondered. "She seems so casual about saving my life." Actually, she seemed casual about everything. He continued to stare at her, and blushed when he felt the tightening erection beginning in his cold, wet pants. Wasn't there a partition or something where he could get out of sight and dress? He glanced around the room. Nothing. She saw him looking around and chewed her lower lip.
I'm sorry, she said. I forgot. They say islanders are peculiarly modest. Is that true?
His blush deepened.
Yes.
She pulled her single suit up and zipped it closed quickly.
I will turn around, she said. When you have dressed, we will eat.
Scooty Wang's quarters were the same silvery gray as the passages, a space about 4 meters by 5, everything squared corners and sharp edges, alien to an islander. 2 cot-sized bed settees. Yep, that is what it says. 2 cot-sized bed settees extruded from the walls, both covered with blankets of bright red and yellow in swirling geometric patterns. A kitchen counter occupied one end of the room and a closet the other. A hatch beside the closet stood open to show a bath with a small immersion tub and shower. Everything was the same material as the walls, deck, and ceiling. Brett ran a hand across one of the walls and felt the cold rigidity. Scooty found a green cushion under one of the cots and tossed it onto the other cot.
Be comfortable, she said.
She threw a switch on the wall beside the kitchen counter, and odd music filled the room. Brett sat down on the cot, expecting it to be hard, but it gave way beneath him, surprisingly resilient. He leaned against the cushion.
What is that music?
She turned from an open cupboard.
Whales. You have heard of them?
He looked toward the ceiling.
They're on the Hive Tank roster, I've heard. A giant earthside mammal that lives down under.
She nodded toward the small speaker grill above the switch.
Their song is most pleasant. I'll enjoy listening to them when we recover them from space.
Brett, listening to the grunts and whistles and thrills, felt their calming influence like a long fetch of waves in a late afternoon. He failed to focus immediately on what she had said. In spite of the whale song, or perhaps because of it, there was a sense of deep quiet in the room that he had never before experienced.
What do you do topside?
I'm a fisherman.
That's good, she said, busying herself at the counter. It puts you on the waves. Waves and currents, that's how we generate our power.
So I've heard, he said. What do you do, besides rescues?
I mathematic the waves, she said. That is my true work.
Mathematic the waves? He had no idea what that meant. It forced him to reflect on how little he knew about Mermen life. Brett glanced around the room. The walls were hard, but he was mistaken about the cold. They were warm, unlike the locker room walls. Scooty, too, did not seem cold. As she had led him here, along the solid passages, they had passed many people. Most had nodded greeting as they chattered with friends or workmates. Everyone moved quickly and surely, and the passageways weren't full of people jostling shoulder to shoulder all the way. Except for work belts, many had been naked. None of that outside bustle penetrated to this little room, though. He contrasted this to topside, where the organics tended to transmit even the smallest noises. Here there was the luxury of noise and the luxury of quiet within a few meters of each other. Scooty did something above her work area, and the room's walls suddenly were brightly colored in flowing sweeps of yellow and green. Long strands of something like kelp undulated in a current, an abstraction. Brett was fascinated at how the color motion on the walls accompanied the whale song.
What do I say to her? He wondered. Alone with a pretty girl in her room, and I can't think of anything. Brilliant, Norton. You're a glittering conversationalist.
He wondered how long he'd been with her. Topside, he kept good track of time by the light of the suns and the dark patches between. Down here, all light was similar. It was disorienting. He looked at Scooty's back while she worked. She pressed a wall button, and he heard her murmur something on a Mermen transphone. Seeing the phone there impressed him with the technological gulf between islanders and mermen. Mermen had this device. Islanders were not offered it in the mercantile. Mermen had this device. Islanders were not offered it in the mercantile. He didn't doubt that some islanders got them through the black market, but he didn't know how it would be of any use to them unless they dealt with mermen all the time.
Some islanders did. Islander subcrews carried portable devices that picked up some transphone channels, but this was for the mermen's convenience as well as the islanders'. Mermen were so damned snobbish about their riches. There was a faint hiss of pneumatics at the counter where Scooty worked. She turned presently, balancing a tray carrying covered bowls and utensils. She placed the tray on the deck between the two cots and pulled up a cushion for her own back. "I don't cook much myself," she said. "The central kitchen is faster, but I add my own spices. They are so bland at central." "Oh?" He watched her uncover the bowls, enjoying the smells. "People already want to know of you," she said. "I have had several calls. I told them to wait. I'm hungry and tired. You too?" "I'm hungry," he agreed. He glanced around the room. Only these two cots. Did she expect him to sleep here? With her? She pulled a bowl and spoon up to her lap. "My father taught me how to cook," she said. He picked up the bowl nearest him and took a spoon. This was not like islander feeding ritual, he noticed. Scooty already was spooning broth into her mouth. Islanders fed guests first, then ate whatever the guests left for them. Brett had heard this didn't always work well with mermen. They often ate everything and left nothing for the host. Scooty licked a few drops of broth from the back of her hand. Brett tasted a sip from his spoon. Delicious. "The air is dry enough for you?" Scooty asked. He nodded, his mouth full of soup. "My room is small, but that makes it easier to keep the air the way I like it, and easier to keep clean. I work topside very often. Dry is comfort to me now, and I don't feel comfortable with the humidity in passages and public places." She put the bowl to her lips and drained it. Brett copied her, then asked, "What'll happen to me? When will I go back topside?" "We'll talk of this after food," she said. She brought up two more bowls and uncovered them, revealing bite-sized chunks of fish in a dark sauce. With the bowl she handed him a pair of carved bone chopsticks. "After food," he agreed, and took a bite of the sauced fish. It was peppery hot and brought tears to his eyes, but he found the aftertaste pleasant. "It is our custom," Scooty said. "Food sets the body at ease. I can say, 'Brett Norton, you are safe here and well.'" Sorry, "Brett Norton, you are safe here and well. But I know Down Under is alien to you, and you have been in danger. You must speak to your body in the language it understands before sense returns to you. Food, rest, these are what your body speaks." He liked the rational sense of her words, and returned to the fish, enjoying it more with each bite. Scooty, he saw, was eating as much as he, even though she was much smaller. He liked the delicate flick of her chopsticks into the bowl and at the edges of her mouth. What a beautiful mouth, he thought. He remembered how she had given him that first breath of life. She caught him staring, and he quickly returned his attention to his bowl. "The sea takes much energy, much heat," she said. "I wear a dive suit as little as possible. Hot shower, much hot food, a warm bed, these are always needed. Do you work the Islander subs topside, Brett?" Her question caught him off guard. He'd begun to think that she had no curiosity about him. "Maybe I'm just some kind of obligation to her," he thought. "If you save someone, maybe you're stuck with them." "I'm a surface fisherman for a contractor named Twisp," he said. "He's the one I most want to get word to. He's a strange man, but the best in a boat that I've ever seen." "Surface," she said. "That's much danger from dashes, isn't it? Have you seen dashes?" He tried to swallow in a suddenly dry throat. "We carry squawks. They warn us, you know." He hoped that she wouldn't notice the dodge. "We're afraid of your nets," she said. "Sometimes visibility is bad and they can't be seen. Mermen have been killed in them." He nodded, remembering the thrashing and the blood and Twisp's stories of other merman deaths in the nets. Should he mention that to Scooty? Should he ask about the strange reaction of the maritime court? No, she might not understand. This would be a barrier between them. Scooty sensed this, too. He could tell because she spoke too quickly. Would you not prefer to work in your subs? I know they are soft-bellied, not like ours at all, but I think I think I'd like to stay with Twisp unless he goes back to the subs. I'd sure like to know if he's all right. We will rest, and when we wake, you will meet some of our people who can help. Mermen travel far. We pass along the word. You will hear of him and he of you, if that's your wish. My wish? He stared at her, absorbing this. You mean I could choose to disappear? She shrugged her eyebrows, accenting the gamin look. Where you want to be is where you should be. Who you want to be is the same, not so? It can't be that simple. If you have not broken the law, there are possibilities down under. The Merman world is big. Wouldn't you like to stay here? She coughed, and he wondered if she had been about to say, Stay here with me. Scooty suddenly seemed much older, much more worldly. Talk among the islanders gave Brett the impression that Mermen had an extra sophistication, a sense of belonging anywhere they went, of knowing more than islanders. Do you live alone? He asked. Yes, this was my mother's place, and it's close to where my father lived. Don't Mermen families live together? She scowled. My parents, stubborn, both of them. They couldn't live together. I lived with my father for a long time, but he died. She shook her head, and he saw the memories pain her. I'm sorry, he said. Where's your mother? She is dead, too. Scooty looked away from him. My mother was net-bound less than a year ago. Scooty's throat moved with a convulsive swallow as she turned back to him. It has been difficult. There is a man, Gallo, who became my mother's lover. That was after. She broke off and shook her head sharply. I'm sorry, Scooty, he said. I didn't mean to bring back painful, but I want to talk about it. Down here there is no one I can. I mean, my closest friends avoid the subject, and I. She rubbed her left cheek. You are a new friend, and you listen. Of course, but I don't see what. After my father died, my mother signed over. You understand, Brett, that my father was Ryan Wang. There was much wealth. Wang, he thought. Mermen Mercantile. His rescuer was a wealthy heiress. I I didn't. It is all right. Gallo was to be my stepfather. My mother signed over to him control of much that my father left. Then she died. Bit of a red flag to us who know more about Mr. Gallo than perhaps she does, and can see the pattern of such things. So there's nothing for you. What? Oh, you mean from my father. No, that is not my problem. Besides, Kareen is my new guardian. My father left her many things. They were friends. What? You said there's a problem. Everyone wants Kareen to marry Gallo, and Gallo pursues this. Brett noted that Scooty's lips tightened every time she spoke Gallo's name. What is wrong with this Gallo? He asked. Scooty spoke in a low voice. He frightens me. Why? What's he done? I don't know, but he was on the crew when my father died, and when my mother died. Your mother, you said a net, an islander net. That is what they said. He lowered his gaze, remembering his recent experience with a merman in the net. Seeing the look on his face, Scooty said, I have no resentment toward you. I can see that you are sorry. My mother knew the danger of nets. You said Gallo was with your parents when they died. Do you? I have never spoken of this to anyone before. I don't know why I say it to you, but you are sympathetic. And you, I mean, I owe you. Oh, no, it is nothing like that. It's just, I like your face and the way you listen. Brett lifted his gaze and met her staring at him. Is there no one who can help you? He said. You said Kareen everyone knows about her. Can't she? I would never say these things to Kareen. Brett studied Scooty for a moment, seeing the shock and fear in her face. He already had a sense of the wildness in Merman life from the stories told among islanders. Violence was no stranger down here, if the stories were to be believed, but what Scooty suggested. You wonder if Gallo had anything to do with the deaths of your parents, he said. She nodded without speaking. Why do you suspect this? He asked me to sign many papers, but I pleaded ignorance and consulted Kareen. I don't think the papers he showed her were the same. I don't think the papers he showed her were the same ones he brought to me. She has not yet said what I should do. Has he? Brett cleared his throat. What I mean is, you are. That is, sometimes islanders marry young. There has been nothing like that, except he tells me to hurry and grow up. It is all a joke. He says he is tired of waiting for me. How old are you? I will be 16 next month. You? I'll be 17 in 5 months. She looked at his net, calloused hands. Your hands say you work hard for an islander. Immediately she popped a hand over her mouth. Her eyes went wide. Brett had heard merman jokes about lazy islanders sunning themselves while mermen built a world under the sea. He scowled. I have a big mouth, Scooty said. I find someone at last who can really be my friend, and I offend him. Islanders aren't lazy, Brett said. Scooty reached out impulsively and took his right hand in hers. I have only to look at you, and I know these stories are lies. Brett pulled his hand away. He still felt hurt and bewildered. Scooty might say something soothing to smooth it over, but the truth had come out involuntarily. I work hard for an islander. Scooty got to her feet and busied herself removing the dishes and the remains of their meal. Everything went into a pneumatic slot at the kitchen wall and vanished with a click and a hiss. Brett stared at the slot. The workers who took care of that probably were islanders permanently hidden from view. Central kitchens and all this space, he said. It's mermen who have things easy. She turned toward him, an intent expression on her face. Is that what islanders say? Brett felt his face grow hot. I don't like jokes that lie, Scooty said. I don't think you do either. Brett swallowed past a sudden lump in his throat. Scooty was so direct. That was not the islander way at all, but he found himself attracted by it. Queets never tells those jokes, and I don't either, Brett said. This Queets, he is your father? Brett thought suddenly about his father and his mother, the butterfly life between intense bouts of painting. He thought about their down center apartment, the many things they owned and cared for, furniture, artwork, even some merman appliances. Queets, though, owned only what he could store in his boat. He owned what he truly needed, a kind of survival selectivity. You are ashamed of your father? Scooty asked. Queets isn't my father. He's the fisherman who owns my contract, Queets Twisp. Oh, yes. You do not own many things, do you, Brett? I see you looking around my quarters and... She shrugged. The clothes on my back were mine, Brett said. When I sold my contract to Queets, he took me on for training and gave me what I need. There isn't room for useless stuff on a coracle. This Queets, he is a frugal man? Is he cruel to you? Queets is a good man, and he's strong. He's stronger than anyone I've ever known. Queets has the longest arms you've ever seen, perfect for working the nets. They're almost as long as he is tall. A barely perceptible shudder crossed Scooty's shoulders. You like this Queets very much, she said. Brett looked away from her. That unguarded shudder told it all. Islanders made mermen shudder. He felt the pain of betrayal deep in his guts. You mermen are all the same, he said. Mutants don't ask to be that way. I don't think of you as a mutant, Brett, she said. Anyone can see that you're normalized. There! Brett snapped, glaring at her. What's normal? Oh, I've heard the talk. Islanders are having more normal births these days, and there's always surgery. Twisp's long arms offend you? Well, he's no freak. He's the best fisherman on Pandora because he fits what he does. I see that I've learned many wrong things, Scooty said, her voice low. Queets Twisp must be a good man because Brett Norton admires him. A wry smile touched her lips and was gone. Have you learned no wrong things, Brett? I'm. After what you did for me, I should not be talking to you this way. Wouldn't you save me if I were caught in your net? Wouldn't you? I'd go in after you and damn the dashers! She grinned, an infectious expression that Brett found himself answering in kind. I know you would, Brett. I like you. I learned things about islanders from you that I didn't know. You are different, but... His grin vanished. My eyes are good eyes, he snapped, thinking this was the difference she meant. Your eyes? She stared at him. They are beautiful eyes. In the water, I saw your eyes first. They are large eyes and difficult to escape. She lowered her gaze. I like your eyes. I I thought. Again she met his gaze. I've never seen two islanders exactly alike, but mermen are never alike either. Everyone down under won't feel that way, he accused. Some will stare, she agreed. Is it not normal to be curious? They will call me mute, he said. Most will not. Queet says words are just funny ripples in the air or printed squiggles. Scooty laughed. I would like to meet this Queets. He sounds like a wise man. Nothing much ever bothered him except losing his boat. Or losing you? Will that bother him? Brett sobered. Can we get word to him? Scooty touched the transphone button and voiced his request over the grill in the wall. The response was too quiet for Brett to hear. She did it casually. He thought then that this marked the difference between them more firmly than his own overlarge eyes with their marvelous night vision. Presently Scooty said, They will try to get word to Vachon. She stretched and yawned. Even yawning she was beautiful, he thought. He glanced around the room, noting the closeness of the two cots. You lived here with just your mother? He asked. Immediately he saw the sad expression return to Scooty's face, and he cursed himself. I'm sorry, Scooty. I should not keep reminding you of her. It's all right, Brett. We are here and she is not. Life continues, and I do my mother's work. Again that gamin grin twisted her mouth. And you are my first roommate. He scratched his throat, embarrassed, not knowing the moral rules between the sexes down under. What did it mean to be a roommate? Stalling for time, he asked, What is this work of your mother's that you do? I told you, I mathematic the waves. I don't know what that means. Where new waves or wave patterns are seen, I go. As my mother did, and both her parents before her. It is a thing for which our family has a natural talent. But what do you do? How the waves move, that tells us how the suns move and how Pandora responds to that movement. Ah? Just from looking at the waves waves are gone just like that. He snapped his fingers. We simulate the waves in a lab, she said. You know about wave walls, I'm sure, she said. Some go completely around Pandora several times. And you can tell when they'll come? Sometimes. He thought about this. The extent of Mermen knowledge suddenly daunted him. You know we warn the islands when we can, she said. He nodded. To mathematic the waves, I must translate them, she said. She patted her head absently, exaggerating her gamin appearance. Translate is a better word than mathematic, she said, and I teach what I do, of course. Of course, he said, an heiress, a rescuer, and now an expert on waves. Who do you teach? He asked, wondering if he could learn this thing she did. How valuable that would be for the islands. The kelp, she said. I translate waves for the kelp. He was shocked. Was she joking, making fun of islander ignorance? She saw the expression on his face because she went on, quickly. The kelp learns. It can be taught to control currents and waves. When it returns to its former density, it will learn more. I teach it some of the things it must know to survive on Pandora. This is a joke, isn't it? He asked. Joke? She looked puzzled. Don't you know the stories of the kelp as it was? It fed itself, it moved gases in and out of the water. The highlighters! Oh, I would love to see them. The kelp knew so many things, and it controlled the currents, the sea itself. All of this the kelp did once. Brett gaped at her. He recalled school-time stories about the sentient kelp, one creature alive as a single identity in all of its parts. But that was ancient history, from the time when men had lived on solid land above Pandora's sea. And it will do this again? He whispered. It learns. We teach it how to make currents and to neutralize waves. Brett thought about what this might mean to island life, drifting on predictable currents in predictable depths. They could follow the weather, the fishing. An odd turn of thought put this out of his mind. He considered it almost unworthy, but who could know for certain what an alien intelligence might do? Scooty, noting his expression, asked, Are you well? He spoke almost mechanically. If you can teach the kelp to control the waves, then it must know how to make waves and currents. What's to prevent it from wiping us out? She was scornful. The kelp is rational. It would not further the kelp to destroy us or the islands. So it will not. Again she stifled a yawn, and he recalled her comment that she had to go back to work soon. The ideas she had put into his head whirled there, though, leaving him on edge, driving away all thought of sleep. Mermen did so many things. They knew so much. The kelp will think for itself. He recalled hearing someone say that, a conversation at the quarters of his parents, important people talking about important matters. But that could not happen without Vata, someone had said in response. Vata is the key to the kelp. That had begun what he remembered as a sprightly and boo-inspired conversation, which, as usual, ran from speculative to paranoid and back. I'll turn out the light for your modesty, Scooty said. She giggled and touched the light down through dim to barely shadow. He watched her fumble her way to her bed. It's dark to her, he thought. For me, she just turned down the glare. He shifted on the edge of his bed. You have a girlfriend topside? Scooty asked. No, not really. You have never shared a room with a girl? On the islands, you share everything with everyone. But to have a room, two people alone, that's for couples who are new to each other. For mating, it is very expensive. Oh my, she said. In the shadowy play of his peculiar vision, he watched her fingers dance nervously over the surface of her cot. Down under we share for mating, yes, but we also share rooms for other reasons. Work partners, schoolmates, good friends. I mean only for you to have one night of recovery. Tomorrow there will be others, and questions and tours and much noise. Still her hands moved in that nervous rhythm. I don't know how I can ever repay you for being so nice to me, he said. But it is our custom, she said. If a merman saves you, you can have what the merman has until you move on. If I bring life into this compound, I'm responsible for it. As though I were your child? Something like. She sighed and began undressing. Brett found he could not invade her privacy and averted his eyes. Maybe I should tell her, he thought. It's not really fair to be able to see this way and not let her know. I would prefer not to interfere with your life, he said. He heard Scooty slip under her blankets. You don't interfere, she said. This is one of the most exciting things that has ever happened to me. You are my friend. I like you. Is that not enough? Brett dropped his clothes and slipped under the covers, pulling them to his neck. Queets always said you couldn't figure a merman. Friends? We are friends, not so? She insisted. He offered his hand across the space between the beds. Realizing that she couldn't see it, he picked up hers in his own. She pressed his fingers hard, her hand warm in his. Presently she sighed and removed her hand gently. I must sleep, she said. Me too. Her hand lifted from the bed and found the switch on the wall. The whale sounds stopped. Brett found the room exquisitely quiet, a stillness he had not imagined possible. He felt his ears relaxing, then an alertness. Suddenly listening for what? He didn't know. Sleep was necessary, though. He had to sleep. His mind said, "Something is being done about informing your parents and Queets." He was alive, and family and friends would be happy after their fears and sadness. Or so he hoped. After several nervous minutes, he decided the lack of motion was preventing sleep. The discovery allowed him to relax more, breathe easier. He could remember with his body the gentle rocking motion topside, and thought hard about that, tricking his mind into the belief that waves still lifted and fell beneath him. "Brett?" Scooty's voice was little more than a whisper. "Yes?" "Of all the creatures in Hive, the ones I would like most are the birds, the little birds that sing." "I've heard recordings from ship," he said, his voice sleepy. "The songs are as painfully beautiful as the wails, and they fly." "We have pigeons and squawks," he said. "The squawks are ducks, and they do not sing." So, for future reference, every time you have a scene with a squawk, it's a duck, so it's going whack very loudly. "Very loud duck." "Whack," she said. She didn't say whack.
"The squawks are ducks, and they do not sing," she said.
"But they whistle when they fly, and it's fun to watch them."
Her blankets rustled as she turned away from him.
"Good night, friend," she whispered. "Sleep flat."
"Good night, friend," he answered, and there, at the edge of sleep, he imagined her beautiful smile.
"Is this how love begins?"
he wondered. There was a tightness in his chest, which did not go away until he fell into a restless sleep. The child Vata slipped into catatonia as the kelp and highlighter sickened. She has been comatose for more than 3 years now, and since she carries both kelp and human genes, it is hoped that she can be instrumental in restoring the kelp to sentience. Only the kelp can tame this terrible sea. Hallie Eckel, The Journals. It was not so much that Ward Keel noticed the stillness as that he felt it all over his skin. I'm going to reread that with proper emphasis on the right syllable. It was not so much that Ward Keel noticed the stillness as that he felt it all over his skin. Events had conspired to keep him topside throughout his long life, not that he had ever felt a keen desire to go down under. "Admit it," he told himself. "You were afraid because of all the stories. Deprivation shock, pressure syndrome." Now, for the first time in his life, there was no movement of deck under his bare feet, no nearby sounds of human activity and voices, no hiss of organic walls against organic ceilings, none of the omnipresent frictions to which islanders adjusted as infants. It was so quiet his ears ached. Beside him, in the room where Kareen had left him to adjust for a few moments, stood a large plasglass wall revealing a rich undersea expanse of reds, blues, and washed greens. The subtlety of unfamiliar shading held him rapt for several minutes. Ale had said, "I will be nearby. Call if you need me." Mermen well knew the weaknesses of those who came down under. Awareness of all that water overhead created its own peculiar panic in some of the visitors and migrants. And being alone, even by choice, was not something islanders tolerated well until they had adjusted to it slowly. A lifetime of knowing that other human beings were just on the other side of those thin organic walls, almost always within the sound of a whispered call, built up blind spots. You did not hear certain things, the sounds of love-making, family quarrels, and sorrows. Not unless you were invited to hear them. Was Ale softening him up by leaving him alone here? Keel wondered. Could she be watching through some secret mermen device?
He felt certain that Ale, with her medical background and long association with islanders, knew the problems of a first-timer. Having watched Ale perform her diplomatic duties over the past few years, Keel knew she seldom did anything casually. She planned. He was sure she had a well-thought-out motive for leaving an islander alone in these circumstances. The silence pressed hard upon him. A demanding thought filled his mind. Think, Ward. That's what you're supposed to be so good at. He found it alarming that the thought came to him in his dead mother's voice, touching his oral centers so sharply that he glanced around, almost fearful that he would see a ghostly shade shaking a finger of admonishment at him. He breathed deeply once, twice, and felt the constriction of his chest ease slightly. Another breath, and the edge of reason returned. Silence did not ache as much nor press as heavily. During the descent by courier sub, Ale had asked him no questions and had supplied no answers. Reflecting on this, he found it odd. She was noted for hard questions to pave the way for her own arguments. Was it possible that they simply wanted him down here and away from his seat on the committee? He wondered. Taking him as an invited guest was, after all, less stressful and dangerous than outright kidnapping. It felt odd to think of himself as a commodity with some undetermined value. Comforting, though, it meant they would probably not employ violence against him. Now, why did I think that? He wondered. He stretched his arms and legs and crossed to the couch facing the undersea view. The couch felt softly supportive under him in spite of the fact that it was of some dead material. The stiffness of age made the soft seat especially welcome. He sensed the dying remora within him still fighting to survive. Avoid anxiety, the medics told him. That was most certainly a joke in his line of work. The remora still produced vital hormones, but he remembered the warning. We can replace it, although the replacements won't last long, and their survival time will become shorter and shorter as new replacements are introduced. You are rejecting them, you see. His stomach growled. He was hungry, and that he found to be a good sign. There was nothing to indicate a food preparation area in the room, no speakers or view screens. The ceiling sloped upward away from the couch to the viewport, which appeared to be about 6 or 7 meters high. How extravagant, he thought. Only one person in all this space. A room this size could house a large islander family. The air was a bit cooler than he liked, but his body had adjusted. The dim light through the viewport cast a green wash over the floor there. Bright phosphorescence from the ceiling dominated the illumination. The room was not far under the sea's surface. He knew this from the outside light level. Plenty of water over him, though. Millions of kilos. The thought of all that weight pressing in on this space brought a touch of sweat to his upper lip. He ran a damp palm over the wall behind the couch, warm and firm. He breathed easier. This was Mermen space. They didn't build anything fragile. The wall was plasteel. He had never before seen so much of it. The room struck him suddenly as a fortress. The walls were dry, testimony to a sophisticated ventilation system. Mermen topside tended to keep their quarters so humid he felt smothered by the air. Except for Ale, but she was like no other human he had ever met, islander or merman. The air in this room, he realized, had been adjusted for islander comfort. That reassured him. Keel patted the couch beside him and thought of Joy, how much she would like that surface. A hedonist Joy. He tried to picture her resting on the couch. A desire for Joy's comforting presence filled him with sudden loneliness. Abruptly, he wondered about himself. He had been mostly a loner throughout his life, only the occasional liaison. Was the proximity of death working a fearful change on him? The thought disgusted him. Why should he inflict himself on Joy, saddle her with the sorrow of a permanent parting? I am going to die soon. He wondered briefly who the committee would elect as Chief Justice to replace him. His own choice would be Carolyn, but the political choice would be Matt's. He did not envy whoever they chose. It was a thankless job. There were things to do before he made his final exit, though. He stood and steadied himself against the couch. His neck ached, as usual. His legs felt rubbery and didn't want to support him at first. That was a new symptom. The deck underfoot was hard plasteel, and he was thankful that it, like the walls, was heated. He waited for strength to return, then, leaning against the wall, made his way toward the door at his left. There were two buttons beside the door. He pressed the lower one and heard a panel slide back behind the couch. He looked toward the sound, and his heart shifted into triple time. The panel had concealed a mural. He stared at it. The thing was frighteningly realistic, almost photographic. It showed a surface construction site at least half destroyed, flames everywhere, and men wriggling in the tentacles of highlighters drifting overhead. Highlighters died with the kelp, he thought. This was either an old painting or somebody's imaginative reconstruction of history. He suspected the former. The rich sunset background, the intimate detail of highlighters, everything focused on one worker near the center who pointed a finger at the viewer. It was an accusing figure, dark-eyed and glaring. I know that place, Keel thought. How is it possible? Familiarity was stronger than the flutterings of déjà vu. This was real seeing, a memory. The memory told him that somewhere in this room or nearby there was a red mandala. How do I know this? He examined the room carefully. Couch, plasport, the mural, bare walls, an oval hatch door. No mandala. He walked to the viewport and touched it. Cool. The only cool surface in the room. How strange the fixed viewport installation was. Nothing like it at all on the islands. Couldn't be. The flecks of bubbly around the solid plas would tear away the organics that sealed it, and the heavy, solid material would turn. Ooh, sorry. The flecks of bubbly around the solid plas would tear away the organics that sealed it, and the heavy, solid material would turn into a thing of destruction during a storm. Drift watchers, mutated cornea, were safer in rough weather, even if they did require care and feeding. The plas was incredibly clear. Nothing in the feel of it suggested the extreme density and thickness. A small, heavily whiskered scrubber fish grazed the outside, cleaning the surface. Beyond the fish, a pair of mermen came into view, jockeying a heavy sledge loaded with rocks and mud. They went past him out of sight beyond a slope to his right. Out of curiosity, Keel fisted the plas. Thump, thump. The scrubberfish continued grazing, undisturbed. Anemone and ferns, grasses and sponges waved in the current beneath the fish. Dozens of other fish, a multicolored mixed school, cleaned the surface of kelp leaves beyond the immediate growth. Larger fish poked along the soft bottom mud, stirring up puffs of gray sediment. Keel had seen this sort of thing in hollows, but the reality was different. Some of the fish he recognized, creatures from the labs that had been brought for judgment by the committee before being released in the sea. A harlequin fish came up below the scrubber and nudged the plas. Keel remembered the day the CeePee had blessed the first harlequin fish before their release. It was almost like seeing an old friend. Once more, Keel turned to his examination of the room and that elusive memory. Why did it feel so damned familiar? Memory said the missing mandala should be to the right of the mural. He walked to that wall and brushed a finger along it, looking for another panel switch. Nothing, but the wall moved slightly and he heard a clicking. He peered at it. It was not plasteel, but some kind of light composite material. A faint seam ran down the middle of the wall. He put a palm against the surface to the right of the seam and pushed. The panel slid back, revealing a passage, and immediately he smelled food. He opened the panel wide and walked through. The passage made a sharp turn to the left, and he saw lights. Kareen Ale stood there in a kitchen dining area, her back to him. A rich smell of strong tea and fish broth assailed his nostrils. He drew a breath to speak, but stopped as he saw the red mandala. The sight of it above Kareen's right shoulder brought a sigh from Keel. The mandala drew his consciousness into the shapes there, twisting him through circles and wedges toward the center. A single eye peered out from the center, out at the universe. It was unlidded and rested atop a golden pyramid. As you'll recall, these were both, I think, artworks by the really strong woman in the Jesus incident. Oh, it's at the tip of my tongue. The tip of my brain. Not Hallie Eckel, not the one with the chameleonic skin. That was Wayla Taulini. Dowlini, whatever. Oh, come on. Anyway, you know the one who has to get her revenge on the CeePee because he's he's kind of monstrous in his way. Anyway, you know what I mean, or you don't. In which case, it's in the Jesus incident. These can't be my memories, he thought. It was a terrifying experience. Ship memories flitted through his mind, someone walking down a long, curved passage, a violet-lighted agrarium fanned out to his left. He felt powerless before the stream of visions. Kelp waved to him from some place under the sea, and schools of fish his committee had never approved swam past his eyes. Ale turned and saw the enraptured expression on his face, the fixed intensity with which he stared at the mandala. "Are you all right?" she asked. Her voice shocked him out of the other memories. He exhaled a trembling breath, inhaled. I'm hungry, he said. There was no thought of revealing the weird memories he had just experienced. How could she understand when he did not understand? How could she understand when he did not understand? "Why don't you sit here?" she asked. She indicated a small table set for two at one end of the kitchen area beside a smaller Plaz port. The table was low, Mermen style. His knees ached just thinking about sitting there. "I've cooked for you myself," Ale said. Noting his still bemused expression, she added, "That hatchway in the other room leads to a head with shower and wash basin. Beyond it you'll find office facilities if you require them. The exterior hatchways are out there as well." He crowded his legs under the table and sat with his elbows on the surface in front of him, his hands supporting his head. Was that a dream? He wondered. The red mandala lay directly in front of him. He was almost afraid to focus on it. "You're admiring the mandala," Ale said. She busied herself once more in the kitchen area. He lifted his attention away and let his gaze trace the ancient lines along their mysterious pathways. Nothing drew him inward this time. Slowly, bits of his own memories crept into his mind. Images flashed behind his eyes and stuttered like a crippled larynx, then caught. Awareness reached back to one of his earliest history lessons, a holo being played in the center of a classroom. It had been a docudrama for young children. Islanders loved theatricals, and this one had been fascinating. He could not remember the title, but he did recall that it dealt with the last days of Pandora's continents. They didn't look small at all in the hollows, and the death of the kelp. That had been the first time Keel had heard the kelp called Avata. Behind the hollow figures playing out the drama in a command post had been a wall, and that frightening mural from the other room. Nearby, as the hollow shifted its focus, there had been the red mandala, just as he saw it now. Keel did not want to think how long ago he had watched the drama, more than 70 years, anyway. He returned his attention to Ale. "Is that the original mandala or a copy?" he asked. "I'm told it's the original. It's very old, older than any settlement on Pandora. You seem taken by it."
"I've seen it and the mural out there before," he said. "These walls in the kitchen area are more recent, aren't they?"
The space was remodeled for my convenience, she said. I've always been drawn to these rooms. The mandala and mural are where they've always been, and they're cared for.
Then I know where I am, he said. Islander children learn history through holodramas, and
I know that one, she said. Yes, this is part of the old redoubt. Once it stood completely out of the sea, with some fine mountains behind it, I understand. She brought food to the table on a tray and set out the bowls and chopsticks.
wasn't most of the redoubt destroyed? He asked. The documentary hollows were supposed to be reconstructions of a few from before.
Whole sections survived intact, she said. Automatic latches closed and sealed off much of the redoubt. We restored it very carefully.
I'm impressed,
He nodded, reassessing the probable importance of Kareen Ale. Mermen had remodeled a part of the old redoubt for her convenience. She lived casually in a museum, apparently immune to the historical value of the objects and buildings surrounding her. He had never before met a merman in a merman environment, and he now recognized this blank spot in his experience as a weakness. Keel forced himself to relax. For a dying man, there were advantages to being here. He didn't have to decide life and death for new life. No pleading mothers and raging fathers would confront him with creatures who could not pass committee. This was a world away from the islands. Ale sipped her tea. It smelled of mint and suddenly reignited Keel's hunger. He began to eat, islander style, setting aside equal portions for his host. The first taste of fish broth convinced him that it was the richest and most delicately spiced broth he'd ever shared. Was this the general diet for mermen? He cursed his lack of down-under experience. Keel noted that Ale enjoyed her own helping of the steaming soup and felt insulted at first.
Another cultural thing, he realized.
He marveled that a simple difference in table manners could need translation to avoid international disaster. Unanswered questions still buzzed in his head. Perhaps a more devious approach was indicated, a mixture of merman directness with islander obliqueness.
It's pleasantly dry in these quarters, he said, but you don't need a sponge. You don't oil your skin. I've often wondered how you get by in a topside environment.
She dropped her gaze from his face and held her teacup to her lips with both hands.
Hiding, he thought.
Ward, you are a very strange person, she said as she lowered the cup. That is not the question I expected.
What question did you expect?
I prefer to discuss my immunity from the need for a sponge. You see, we have quarters down under that are kept with a topside environment. I was raised in such quarters. I'm acclimated to islander conditions, and I adapt very quickly to the humidity down under, when I have to.
You were chosen as an infant for topside duty?
There was hesitation and shock in his voice. I was chosen then for my present position, she said. A number of us were set aside in the possibility that some of us would meet the mental and physical requirements. Keel stared at her, astonished. He had never heard of such a cold dismissal of someone's entire life. Ale had not chosen her own life. And, unlike most islanders, she had a body that in no way restricted her from any trade she chose. He remembered suddenly how she planned everything. A planned person who planned. Ale had been distorted. She probably saw it as training, but training was just an acceptable distortion.
But do you live a merman life? He asked. You follow their customs, you swim and...
Look. She unfastened her tunic at the neck and dropped the top of it, turning her breasts away from him to expose the shoulders. Her back was as clear-skinned and pale as weathered bone. At the top of her shoulder blades the skin had been pinched into a short strip of ridge adjacent to the spine. There she carried the clear pucker mark of an airfish, but in a peculiar face. He caught the meaning immediately.
If that mark were on your neck, islanders might be distracted when they met you, right?
It occurred to him that she would have undergone major arterial reshifting to carry this off, a complicated surgery.
You have beautiful skin, he added. It's a shame they marked it up that way at all.
It was done when I was very young, she said. I hardly think about it any more. It's just a convenience.
He resisted the urge to stroke her shoulder, her smooth, strong back. Careful, you old fool, he told himself. She restored the top of her garment, and when her gaze met his, he realized that he had been staring. You're very beautiful, Kareen, he said. In the old hollows, all humans look something like you, but you're... He shrugged, feeling the exceptional presence of his appliance against his neck and shoulders. Forgive an old mute, he added, but I've always thought of you as the ideal. She turned a puzzled frown on him.
I've never before heard an islander call himself a mute. Is that how you think of yourself?
Not really, but a lot of islanders use the term. Joking, mostly, but sometimes a mother will use it to get a youngster's attention. Like, Mute, get your grubby little paws out of that frosting, or you go for that deal, my man, and you're one dumb mute. Somehow, when it comes from one of us, it's all right. When it comes from a merman, it strikes deeper than I can describe. Isn't that what you call us among yourselves? Mutes?
Boorish, Mermen might, and, well, it's a rather common bit of slang in some company. Personally, I don't like the word. If a distinction has to be made, I prefer clone or lon, as our ancestors did. Perhaps my quarters give me a penchant for antiquated words.
Or would she say penchant? I'm going to go with penchant.
Perhaps my quarters give me a penchant for antiquated words.
So you've never referred to us as mutes yourself? A rosy blush crept up her neck and over her face. He found it most attractive, but the response told him her answer. She put a smooth, tanned hand over his wrinkled and liver-spotted fingers.
Ward, you must understand that one trained as a diplomat, I mean, in some company,
when on the islands, do as the islanders do.
She removed her hand. The back of his own cooled in disappointment. Something like that, she said. She picked up her teacup and swirled the dregs. Keel saw the defensiveness in the gesture. Ale was somehow off balance. He'd never seen her that way before, and he wasn't vain enough to attribute it to this. Excuse me. Ale was somehow off balance. He'd never seen her that way before, and he wasn't vain enough to attribute it to this exchange with her. Keel believed that the only thing that could bother Ale was something totally unplanned, something with no body of knowledge behind it, no diplomatic precedent, something out of her control. Ward, she said, I think there is one point that you and I have always agreed on.
She kept her attention on the teacup. We have. He held his tone neutral, not giving her any help.
Human has less to do with anatomy than with a state of mind, she said. Intelligence, compassion, humor, the need to share.
And build hierarchies? He asked.
I guess that, too. She met his gaze. Mermen are very vain about their bodies. We're proud that we've stayed close to the original norm.
Is that why you showed me the scar on your back?
I wanted you to see that I'm not perfect.
That you're deformed, like me?
You're not making this very easy for me, Ward.
You or yours have the luxury of choice in their mutations. Genetics, of course, adds a particularly bitter edge to the whole thing. Your scar is not like me, but one of your freckles is. Your freckles have a much more pleasant quality to them than this. He tapped the neck support. But I'm not complaining, he assured her, just being pedantic. Now, what is it that I'm not making easy for you?
Keel sat back, pleased for once about those tedious years behind the bench, and some of the lessons those years had taught him. She stared into his eyes, and he saw fear in her expression. There are Mermen fanatics who want to wipe every mute off the face of this planet. The flat abruptness of her statement, the matter-of-fact tone, caught him off guard. Lives were precious to islanders and mermen. This he'd witnessed for himself innumerable times during his many years. The idea of deliberate killing nauseated him, as it did most Pandorans. His own judgments against lethal deviants had brought him much isolation in his lifetime, but the law required that someone pass judgment on people, blobs, and things. He could never decree termination without suffering acute personal agony.
But to wipe out hundreds of thousands.
He returned Ale's stare, thinking about her recent behavior, the food cooked by her own hands, the sharing of these remarkable quarters, and, of course, the scar. I'm on your side, she was trying to say. He felt the planning behind her actions, but there was more to it, he thought, than callous outlines and assignments. Otherwise, why had she been embarrassed? She was trying to win him over to some personal viewpoint.
What viewpoint?
Why? He asked. She drew in a deep breath. The simplicity of his response obviously surprised her. Ignorance, she said.
And how does this ignorance manifest itself?
Her nervous fingers flipped the corner of her napkin. Her eyes sought out a stain on the tabletop and fixed themselves there.
I am a child before you, Keel said. Explain this to me. Wipe every mute off the face of the planet. You know how I feel about the preservation of human life.
As I feel, Ward. Believe me, please.
Then explain it to this child and we can get started defeating it. Why would someone wish death to so many of us just because we're extra normal?
He had never been quite so conscious of his smear of a nose, the eyes set so wide on his temples that his ears picked up the fine liquid click, click of every blink. It's political, she said. There's power in appealing to base responses, and there are problems over the kelp situation.
What kelp situation?
His voice sounded toneless in his own ears, far away and, yes, afraid.
Wipe every mute off the face of this planet.
Do you feel up to a tour? She asked. He glanced at the plaz beside them. Ward looked out at the undersea view.
Out there?
No, she said, not out there. There's been a wave wall topside, and we've got all our crews reclaiming some ground we've lost. His eyes strained to focus forward on her mouth. Somehow he didn't believe anyone's mouth could be so casual about a wave wall.
The islands? He swallowed. How bad was the damage?
Minimal, Ward. To our knowledge, no fatalities. Wave walls may very well be a thing of the past.
I don't understand.
This wave wall was smaller than many of the winter storms you survive every year. We've built a series of networks of exposed land. Land above the sea. Someday they will be islands. Real islands fixed to the planet, not drifting willy-nilly. And some of them, I think, will be continents.
Land, he thought, and his stomach lurched. Land means shallows.
An island could bottom out in shallow water, an ultimate disaster in the vernacular of historians, but she was talking about voluntarily increasing the risk of an islander's worst fear.
How much exposed land?
He asked, trying to maintain a level tone. Not very much, but it's a beginning.
But it would take forever to...
A long time, Ward, but not forever. We've been at it for generations, and lately we've had some help. It's getting done in our lifetime. Doesn't that excite you?
What does this have to do with the kelp?
He felt the need to resist her obvious attempts to mesmerize him. The kelp is the key, she said, just as people, islanders and mermen, have said all along. With the kelp currents a few well-placed artificial barriers, we can control the sea currents. All of them.
Control, he thought. That's the Mermen way of it.
He doubted they could control the seas, but if they could manipulate currents, they could manipulate island movement.
How much control? He wondered. We're in a two-sun system, he said. The gravitational distortions guarantee wave walls, earthquakes.
Not when the kelp was in its prime, Ward. And now there's enough of it to make a difference. You'll see. And currents should begin an aggrading action now, dropping sediment rather than degrading.
Degrading, he thought. He looked at Ale's beauty. Did she even know the meaning of the word? A technical understanding, an engineering approach was not enough. Mistaking the reason of his silence, Ale plunged on. We have records of everything, from the first. We can play the whole reconstruction of this planet from the beginning, the death of the kelp, everything. Not everything, he thought. He looked once more at the wondrous garden beyond the plaz. Growth there was so lush that the bottom could only be glimpsed in a few places. He could see no rock. As a child he had given up watching drift, because all he ever saw was rock and silt. When it was clear enough or shallow enough to see it all. Seeing the bottom from an island had a way of running an icy hand down your back. How close are these artificial barriers to the surface? He asked. She cleared her throat, avoiding his eyes.
Along this section, she said, surf lines are beginning to show. I expect watchers on Vashon have already seen them. That wave wall drifted them pretty close to.
Vashon draws 100 meters at center, he protested. 2/3 of the population live below the water line. Almost 500,000 lives. How can you speak so casually about endangering that many?
Ward! A chill edged her voice. We are aware of the dangers to your islands, and we've taken that into account. We're not murderers. We are on the verge of complete restoration of the kelp and the development of land masses, two monumental projects that we've pursued for generations.
Projects whose dangers you did not share with nor reveal to the islanders. Are we to be sacrificed to your...
No one is to be sacrificed.
Except by your friends who want to wipe out every mute on Pandora. Is this how they intend to do it? Wreck us on your barrier walls and your continents?
We knew you wouldn't understand, she said, but you must realize that the islands have reached their limits, and people haven't. I agree that we should have brought islanders into the planning picture much earlier, but, she shrugged, we didn't. And now we are. It's my job to tell you that what we must do together to see that there is no disaster. It's my job to gain your cooperation
In the mass annihilation of islanders.
No, Ward, damn it, in the mass rescue of islanders and mermen. We must walk on the surface once more, all of us.
He heard the sincerity in her tone, but distrusted it. She was a diplomat, trained to lie convincingly.
And the enormity of what she proposed.
Ale waved a hand toward the exterior garden.
Kelp is flourishing, as you can see, but it's just a plant. It is not sentient as it was before our ancestors wiped it out. The kelp you see there was, of course, reconstructed from the genes carried by certain humans in the...
Don't try to explain genetics to the Chief Justice, Ward growled. We know about your dumb kelp. Dumb kelp is one word. Don't try to explain genetics to the Chief Justice, Ward growled. We know about your dumb kelp. She blushed, and he wondered at the emotional display. It was something he had never before seen in Ale. A liability in a diplomat, no doubt. How had she concealed it before? Or was this situation simply too much for normal repression? He decided to watch the emotional signal and read it for her true feelings.
Calling it dumb kelp is like the school children. Oh, calling it dumb kelp like the school children is hardly accurate, she said.
You're trying to divert me, he accused. How close is Vashon to one of your surf lines right now?
In a few minutes I will take you out and show you, she said. But you must understand what we're...
No, I must not understand, by which you mean accept, such peril for so many of my people. So many people, period. You talk of control. Do you have any idea of the energy in an island's movement? The long, slow job of maneuvering something that big? Your word, this control of which you seem so proud, does not take in the kinetic energy of.
But it does, Ward. I didn't bring you down here for a tea party or an argument. She stood. I hope you have your legs under you because we've got a lot of walking to do.
He stood at that, slowly, and tried to unkink his knees. His left foot tingled in the first stages of waking. Was it possible, all that she said? He could not escape the inbuilt fear all islanders felt at the idea of crashing death on solid bottom. A white horizon could only mean death, a wave wall or some tidal exposure of the planet's rocky surface. Nothing could change that.
How'd a merman make love? Same way every time.
Islander joke. The two coracles, one towing the other, bobbed along on the open sea. Nothing shared the horizon with them except Nothing shared the horizon with them except gray waves, long, deep rollers with intermittent white lines of spume at the crests. Vachon was long gone below the horizon astern, and Twisp, holding his course by the steady wind and the fisherman's instinct for shifts in light, had settled into a patient, watchful wait, giving only rare glances to his radio and RDF. I'm not sure what RDF stands for offhand. He had been all night assembling the gear to hunt for Brett, raising the coracles, repairing the wave wall damage, loading supplies and gear. Around him now was a Pandoran late morning. Only little sun was in the sky, a bright spot on a thin cloud cover, ideal navigation weather. Driftwatch had given him a fix on Vachon's position at the time of the wave wall, and he knew that by mid-afternoon he should be near enough to start search quartering the seas.
If you made it this far, kid, I'll find you.
The futility of his gesture did not escape Twisp. There was nearly a day's delay, not to mention the ever-prowling hunts of dashers. And there was this odd current in the sea, sending a long silvery line down the sweeps of waves. It flowed in his direction, for which Twisp was thankful. He could mark the swiftness of it by the Doppler on his radio, which he kept tuned to Vachon's emergency band. He hoped to hear a report of Brett's recovery. It was possible that Mermen had found Brett. Twisp kept looking for Mermen signs, a flag float for a work party, one of their swift skimmers, the oily surge of a hard-belly sub surfacing from the depths. Nothing intruded on his small circle of horizon. Getting away from Vachon had been a marvel of secret scurrying, all the time expecting security to stop him. But islanders helped each other, even if one of them insisted on being a fool. Gerard had packed him a rich supply of food gifts from friends and from the pantry at the Ace of Cups. Security had been informed of Brett's loss overboard. Gerard's private grapevine said the kid's parents had set up a cry for someone to do something. They had not come to Twisp, though. Strange, that. Official channels only. Twisp suspected security knew all about his preparations for a search and deliberately kept hands off, partly out of resentment over the Norton family pressures, partly because islanders helped each other. People knew he had to do this thing. The docks had been a madhouse of repair when Twisp went down to see whether he could recover his boat. Despite the hard work going on all around, fishermen made time to help him. Brett had been the only person lost with this wave wall, and they all knew what Twisp had to attempt. All through the night people had come with gear, sonar, a spare coracle, a new motor, eel cell batteries, every gift saying, "We know. We sympathize. I'd be doing the same thing if I were you." At the end, ready to set off, Twisp had waited impatiently for Gerard to appear. Gerard had said for him to wait. The big man had come down in his motorized chair, his single fused leg sticking out like a blunted lance to clear the way. His twin daughters ran skipping behind him, and behind them came 5 Ace of Cups regulars wheeling carts with the food stores.
Got you enough for about 25 or 30 days, Gerard had said, humming to a stop beside the waiting boats. I know you, Twisp. You won't give up. An embarrassed silence had fallen over the fishermen waiting on the docks to see Twisp off. Gerard had spoken what was in all their minds. How long could the kid survive out there? While friends loaded the tow coracle, Gerard said, Word's out to the Mermen. They'll contact us if they learn anything. Hard telling what it'll cost you. Twisp had stared at his coracles, at the friends who gave him their precious gear and even more precious physical help. The debt was great. And if he came back, well, he was going to come back. Well, he was going to come back. And with the kid. The debt would be a bitch, though. And only a few hours ago he had been considering abandonment of the independent fisherman's life, going back to the subs. Well, that was the way it went. Gerard's twin girls had come up to Twisp then, begging for him to swing them. The coracles were almost ready, and a strange reluctance had come over everyone, including Twisp. He extended his arms to let each of the girls grip a forearm tight. Then he turned faster, swinging the children wide while the spectators stood back from his long-armed circle. The girls shrieked when their toes pointed at the horizon. He stumbled to a stop, dizzy and sweating. Both girls sat hard on the pier, their eyes not quite caught up with the end of the whirl. You come back, you hear? Gerard had said. My girls will not forgive any of us if you don't. Twisp thought about that oddly silent departure as he held his course with the wind on his cheek and an eye to the light and the swift hiss of the current under his craft. The old axiom of the fishing fleets nurtured him in his loneliness. Your best friend is hope. He could feel the tow coracle tug his boat at the crests. The carrier hum of his radio provided a faint background to the slap of a cross-chop against the hull. He glanced back at the tow. Only the static charge antenna protruded from the lashed cover. The tow rode low in the water. The new motor hummed reassuringly near his feet. Its eel cell batteries had not started to change color, but he kept an eye on them. Unless the antenna picked up a lightning strike, they'd need feeding before nightfall. Gray convolutions of clouds folded downward ahead of him. Sometime soon it was going to rain. He unrolled the clear membrane another fisherman had given him and stretched it over the open cockpit of his coracle, leaving a sag pocket to collect drinking water. The course beeper went off as he finished the final lashings. He corrected for slightly more than 5 degrees deviation, then hunkered under the shelter, sensing the imminent rain, cursing the way this would limit visibility. But he had to keep dry. I never really get miserable if I'm dry. He felt miserable, though. Was there even the faintest hope that he could find the kid? Or was this one of those futile gestures that had to be made for one's own mental well-being? Or is it that I have nothing else to live for? He put that one out of his mind as beyond debate. To give himself physical activity, something to drive out his doubts, he rigged a hand line with a warning bell from the starboard thwart, baited it with a bit of bright streamer that glittered in the water. He paid it out carefully and tested the warning bell with a short tug on the line. The tinkling reassured him. All I'd need, he thought, drag a dead fish along and call in the dashers. Even though dashers preferred warm-blooded meat, they'd go for anything that moved when they were hungry. A lot like humans. Settling back with the tiller under his right armpit, Twisp tried to relax. Still nothing on the radio's emergency band. He reached down and switched to the regular broadcast, coming in on the middle of a music program. Another gift, a nav sounder with its bottom-finding sonar and its store of position memories, rested between his legs. He flipped it on for a position check, worked out the Doppler distance figure from the radio, and nodded to himself. Close enough. Vachon was drifting at a fairly steady 7 clicks per hour back there. His coracle was doing a reliable 12. Pretty fast for trolling with a hand line. The radio interrupted its music program for a commentary on Chief Justice Keel. No word yet from the committee, but observers were saying that his unprecedented fact-finding trip down under could have deep significance to Vashon and all other islands.
What significance?
Twisp wondered. Keel was an important man, but Twisp had trouble extending that importance beyond Vashon. Occasional grumbles over a decision swept through the island communities, but there had been few real disturbances since Keel's elevation, and that was some time back. Sure sign that he was a wise man. The CeePee had been asked to comment on Keel's mission, however, and this aroused Twisp's curiosity. What did the old shipside religion have to do with the Chief Justice's trip? Twisp had always paid only cursory attention to both politics and religion. They were good for an occasional jawing session at the Ace of Cups, but Twisp had always found himself unable to understand what drove people to passionate arguments over ship's real purpose. Who the hell knew what ship's real purpose had been? There might not have been a purpose. It was possible, though, that the old religion was gaining new strength among islanders. It was certainly an unspoken issue between mermen and islanders. There was enough polarization already between topside and down under, diplomats arguing about the functional abilities characteristic of Pandora's split population. Islanders claimed eminence in agriculture, textiles, and meteorology. Mermen always bragged that they had the bodies best adapted for going back to the land. Stupid argument. Twisp always noticed that a group of people, islander or merman, got less intelligent with every member added. If humans can master that one, they've got it made, he thought. Twisp sensed something big was afoot. He felt well away from it out in the open sea. No ship here, no CeePee, no religious fanatics, just one seasoned agnostic. Was ship God? Who the hell cared now? Ship had abandoned them for sure, and nothing else of ship really mattered. A long, sweeping roller lifted the coracle easily to almost twice the height of the prevailing seas. He glanced around from the brief vantage and saw something large bobbing on the water far ahead. Whatever it was, it lay in the silvery channel of the odd current, which was adding to his forward speed. He kept his attention ahead until he picked up the unknown thing much closer, realizing then that it was several things clumped together. A few minutes later he recognized the objects in the clump. Dashes! The squawks lay quiet, though. He glanced at them as he put a hand on the field switch, ready to repel the hunt when they attacked. None of the dashers moved. That's strange, he thought. Never seen dashers sit still before. He lifted his head, raising the catchment sag of his cockpit cover, and peered ahead. As the coracle neared the clump, Twisp counted 7 adults and a tighter cluster of young dashers in the center of the group. They rode the waves together like a dark chunk of bubbly. Dead, he realized. A whole hunt of dashers and all of them dead. What killed 'em? Twisp eased back the throttle, but still kept a hand on the field switch, just in case. They were dead, though, not pretending as a ruse to lure him close. The dashers had locked themselves into a protective circle. Each adult linked a rear leg to the adult on either side. They formed a circle with forepaws and fangs facing out, the young inside. Twisp set a course around them, staring in at the dashers. How long had they been dead? He was tempted to stop and skin at least one. Dasher skins always brought a good price. But it would take precious time, and the hides would rob him of space. They'd stink, too. He circled a bit closer. Up close now he could see how the dashers had adapted so quickly to water. Hollow hairs, millions of trapped air cells that became an efficient flotation system when sea covered all of Pandora's land. Legend said dashers once had feared the water, that the hollow hairs insulated them then against cold nights and oven-hot days among the desert rocks. Because of those hollow hairs, dasher hides made beautiful blankets, light and warm. Again, he was tempted to skin some of them. They were all in pretty good shape. Have to jettison part of his survival cargo if he did, though. What could he spare? One of the dashers displayed a great hood that floated out from its ugly, leather-skinned head like a black mantle. Experts said this was a throwback characteristic. Most dashers had shed the hood in the sea, becoming sleek killing machines with saber fangs and those knife-sharp claws, almost 15 centimeters long on the bigger animals. Jesus. Those are big claws. No wonder they're so dangerous. Lifting a corner of his cockpit cover, he poked at the hooded dasher with a boathook, lifting it far enough to see that the underside had been burned. A deep, crisp line from brisket to belly. The limpness of the beast told him it couldn't have been dead more than a few hours. A half day at most. He withdrew the boathook and refastened the cockpit cover. Burned? He wondered. What had surprised and killed this entire hunt? From below. Swinging the tiller, he resumed his course down the silvery channel of current, checking by compass and the relative signal from Vachon. The radio was still playing popular music. Soon the mysterious clump of dashers lay below the horizon astern. The clouds had lifted slightly, and there was still no rain. He gauged his course by the bright spot on the clouds, the uncertain compass, and the ripple of steady wind across the transparent cover above him. The wind drove spray runnels in parallel lines, giving him a good reading on relative direction. His thoughts turned back to the dashers. He was convinced that Mermen had killed them from beneath, but how? A Mermen subcrew, maybe. If this were an example of a Mermen weapon, islands were virtually defenseless. Now, why would I think Mermen would attack us? Mermen and islanders might be polarized, but war was ancient history, known only through records saved from the Clone Wars. And Mermen were known to go to great trouble to save islander lives. But the whole planet was a hiding place if you lived down under. And Mermen did want Vata, that was true. Always coming up with petitions demanding that she be moved to safer and more comfortable quarters down under. Vata is the key to kelp consciousness, the Mermen said. They said it so often it had become a cliché, but the CeePee seemed to agree. Twisp had never believed everything the CeePee said, but this was something he kept to himself. In Twisp's opinion, it was a power struggle. Vata, living on and on like that with her companion, Duque, beside her, was the nearest thing Pandora had to a living saint. You could start almost any story you wanted about why she lay there without responding. She is waiting for the return of ship, some said. But Twisp had a tech friend who was called in occasionally by the CeePee to examine and maintain the nutrient tank in which Vata and Duque lived. The tech laughed at this story. She's not doing anything but living, the tech said, and I'll bet she has no idea she's even doing that. But she does have kelp genes? Twisp had asked. Sure. We've run tests when the religious mumbo-jumbos and the Mermen observers have their back turned. A few cells is all it takes, you know. The CeePee would be livid. Vata has kelp genes, I'll swear to that. So the Mermen could be right about her? Who the fuck knows? The tech grinned. Lots of us have 'em. Everybody's different, though. Maybe she did get the right batch. Or, for all we really know, Jesus Lewis was Satan, like the CeePee says. And Pandora's Satan's pet project. The tech's revelations did little to change Twisp's basic opinions. It's all politics, and politics is all property. Lately, everything came down to license fees, forms, and supporting the right political group. If you had someone on the inside helping you, things went well. Your property didn't cost you much. Your property didn't cost you so much. Otherwise, forget it. Resentments, jealousy, envy. These were the things really running Pandora. And fear. He'd seen plenty of fear in the faces of mermen confronted by the more severely changed islanders. People even Twisp sometimes thought of as mutes. Fear bordering on horror, disgust, loathing. It was all emotions, and he knew politics was at the bottom of it. And he knew politics was at the bottom of it, too. Dear ship! the horrified mermen were saying with their unmasked faces. Don't let me or anybody I love own a body like that. Sound familiar? Seems like a pretty good general breakdown, succinct breakdown of a lot of how politics tends to work now, at least in the US of A. The beeper interrupted Twisp's black thoughts. Sonar said his depth here was a little under 100 meters. He glanced around at the open sea. The silvery current channel had been joined by tributaries on both sides. He could feel the current churn beneath his coracle. Bits of flotsam shared the water around him now, kelp tendrils mostly, some short lengths of floating bone. Those would have to be from squawks. Wouldn't float otherwise. 100 meters, he thought. Pretty shallow. Vachon drew just about that much at center. Mermen preferred building where it remained shallow most of the time, he recalled. Was this a merman area? He looked around for signs. Dive floats, the surface boiling with a sub's backwash, or a foil coming up from the depths. There was only the sea and the folding current that swept him along in its steady grip. Lots of kelp shreds in this current. Could be an area where mermen were replanting the stuff. Twisp had found himself taking the mermen side on that project in many a bar argument. More kelp meant more cover and feed for fish. Nursery areas. More fish meant more food, and more fish meant more food for the islands and for mermen, in a more predictable locations. His depth finder said the bottom was holding steady at 90 meters. Mermen had reason to prefer shallows. Better for the kelp. Easier to trade topside, as long as islands had plenty of clearance. And there were all those stories that the mermen were trying to reclaim land on the surface. There might be a merman outpost or trading station nearby, and they could give him word on whether they had rescued the kid. Besides, the little he knew about mermen made him that much more fascinated by them, and the prospect of contact excited him for its own sake. Twisp began to build a fantasy, a dream truth that mermen had saved Brett. He scooped a handful of the kelp and found himself daydreaming that Brett had been rescued by a beautiful young merman girl and was falling in love somewhere down under. Damn, I gotta stop that, he thought. The dream collapsed. Bits of it kept coming back to him, though, and he had to repress them sharply. Hope was one thing, he thought. Fantasy was quite another thing. And dangerous. If only he knew! If only he knew. Anyway, that is going to do it for this week. Hope people enjoyed. It's a fun book. I enjoy it. I think it's a great series. I'm glad somebody cajoled me to. I think they wanted to hear the Jesus incident, and I was like, well, to do the Jesus incident, I think I have to do Destination Void. And if I do the Jesus incident after I do Destination Void, I might as well do the rest of the series. Plus, it gave me an excuse to reread it. I'm always looking for an excuse to reread books. That's another reason why I do this stream, to be honest, is it gives me an excuse. Tangentially related, on some degree of prodding, not much prodding. After we finish with Absolution, I will probably be reading Down Below Station aloud. I guess on Wednesdays for now. Because a cookie recommended me watch a show titled Pantheon, which is basically like if Permutation City and the book Permutation City by Greg Egan and the book Cytine by C.J. Sherry got together and had a child, and it's pretty reasonable. It's pretty good. So I'm like, oh, reading it, watching the show, I got to like episode 3, and I'm like, I have to read Cytine on stream. Like, I've always wanted to read Cytine on stream, but now I'm going to start actually working towards it. It's always been
Oh, I'm not going to just read it directly because there's a bunch of legwork I want to do in order to kind of build up to Cytine. Namely, I want to like Down Below Station is a big part of that. The big two that I need to read aloud on stream before I read Cytine aloud would probably be Down Below Station and 40,000 at Gehenna, or however that's pronounced. And those are kind of the key important bits. Technically, Serpent's Reach would probably qualify because that mentions some stuff that's basically relevant, but it's not quite as important to Cytine. Um, so I probably would not do that one necessarily, though I do want to read that one on stream too, but I have to reread it myself because it's been like 20 something years. I wasn't even 100% sure I had a copy of it because I thought I had read it from a library at the time. Um, but I do have it. It's bundled in with something else, and I can't remember what that is offhand. Anyway, um, so Down Below Station will be starting in a couple weeks, like a month probably, give or take, monthish, maybe a month and a bit. Um, Other than that, we're going to keep reading Absolution. That's going to be the next 3 weeks, roughly. Next 3 Wednesdays. Lazarus Effect on Fridays, which is going to be more than 3 installments. At a guess, probably closer to 4 or 5 more. That seems reasonable. If faith. Let me actually partition ahead here. That's probably good. Let me see. How many pages does that do? That's probably about the same as what we had. Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah. Anyway, things are progressing. There is plot movement afoot in this book, which is good. Oh, and on Mondays we'll be reading the final portion of the Full Metal Panic! Book 1, Fighting Boy Meets Girl. Um, the thrilling action sequence from last week was not the end of the thrilling action sequences. We get our first real look at the Arbalest, which is kind of the poster child mecha of the show slash series. Kind of like the RX-78-2 is for Mobile Suit Gundam. Anyway, that'll do it for me. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Sorry if I seemed a little low energy. Um, I tried to keep it peppy. I do not always succeed, he says as he bumps his microphone trying to get a drink of water. Smooth. Anyway, being left-handed has its pros and cons. Mostly cons. Mostly cons. Shit, I just gave out PPI. I should not be giving out personal information in any way. You'll never find out who I am, and if you do, don't tell anyone. Thanks. If you do know who I am, and somehow I've told you about this for some reason, I don't know who you are. Don't tell other people. I actually don't know what service it's on. Let me find out what service Pantheon is on. I'm sorry, I know I'm on a chat delay. Pantheon. TV series. What I wasn't expecting was that it was an animated series. That caught me flat-footed. It was on Amazon. Okay, so season 1 came out on AMC Plus. I don't know if that's still a thing. The second season is on Amazon Prime Video, and I think the first season is as well. Let me double check and make sure. Pantheon. Pantheon. No, I don't care about that. Oh, and there's a physical release, I think. I think there's a physical release. Currently unavailable. Well, that's useless to me. Huh. And now I can't find it because Amazon is a terrible, terrible place to actually look for things. It can be very trying. Come on. Season 2.
Oh.
Huh. Well, that's useless. Give me a minute. The reason the left-handed comment came up is because I'm left-handed. The microphone on the headset I'm wearing to project this is on the left side, so if I'm drinking water, it's generally on my left. You can see how it can become a problem. Pantheon Season 1. Where do they have that for viewment? Oh, it might be on Netflix. Cool. Well, thanks, Wikipedia, for being obtuse about that. Note to self, don't use Wikipedia as a source of information. It is frequently not up to date at best. So definitely season 1 appears to be on Netflix. Let me see if season 2 is. Looks like season 2 is as well. Okay, good. I watched it through other means, which I will not enumerate. Yeah, the voice cast kind of threw me. Like I was like, oh, I know that guy. I know that girl. I know these people. Um, and then there's a bunch of people I'm like, wait, who's that? Um, so pretty good stuff. Where are you? Yeah, like when I heard Chris Diamantopoulos as like this side character, I'm like, oh, it's that guy. He's got the male pattern baldness and the head and the stuff. I was like, oh, it's that guy. Cool. But yeah, a pretty solid cast. I'm not shilling it per se, but I guess you could say I'm shilling it. Um, Thank you to a cookie, by the way, for recommending that one. That one was good. That is a good recommend. Um, Covers some similar territory to, as I said, Permutation City and Cytine. Um, I did not think it was going to go in that direction, but I'm glad it did. Where are you? Oh, apparently they got Neil deGrasse Tyson for a bit role. That's cute in season 2, which I haven't gotten to yet. But yeah, no, it's pretty neat. I'm trying to, because I know I recognize the guy who plays a character. I know that voice, and I'm like, oh, it's got to be like Jeff Dunham. And I'm like, maybe it's not, and I'm just remembering a different person. Never mind. Where are you? It could just be like put through a voice modulator, and I'm just silly. Anyway, it's not a bad show. If you like stuff that I like, I was having kind of a diatribe on the Discord with it about it. With I say diatribe. I was kind of ranting or rambling about it. But I was like, oh wow. Basically, the thing that floored me was I'm like, oh, I've been headspace wise, I've been deep into Greg Egan style, really kind of not as out there now, but out there at the time, sci-fi, and I'm like, I didn't really think people were making science fiction like that in a more accessible medium than books. That I have to say that books are an inaccessible medium is really sad, but it seems that way sometimes. Um, oh, it was William Hurt who is the guy. Okay, okay, that's why I recognize his voice. I don't know why I confused him with Jeff Dunham. I could see his face. I saw the right guy in my head, but I couldn't remember his name. Anyway, um, but yeah, I was like, oh wow, I didn't think people were finally getting around to making science fiction like this for like a televised show. It's not a televised show technically, but we take what we can get at this point. So I was like, oh okay, that's pretty solid. I'm like, hey, this is working. Is it perfect? Not quite. There's some things I would wish to be otherwise, but that's a personal preference thing, and I understand why things are the way they are. I haven't gotten to season 2 yet, but I've been enjoying myself, so good times. Um, good times. Mostly that they just seem to have like effectively unlimited processing power. And I'm like, wait a minute, where's all that coming from? How are you swinging this exactly? We're just not going to talk about it. Okay. They hand wave it by being like, well, Moore's law, and I'm like, okay, cool, that's fine. It's all right. It's okay. I don't. I try not to get too upset. It's like the recent Villeneuve Dune adaptations. I know some people got upset about certain aspects of those, and it's like, okay, people are upset that Liette Kynes is a black woman, and I'm like, their relevance to the actual proceedings doesn't matter. Um, Beyond being a character that exists and giving birth to Channy at some point. That's it. I'm pretty sure that's yes, yes. Pretty sure they're the father, um, mother in this case, which doesn't really get brought up. So in the movie, so it doesn't really matter even then. And it's like, you know, whether they're white or black doesn't matter. And anyone who's like, well, if they're an envoy from the emperor, they're white. I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense. In fact, it makes more sense for them to be darker. And then they're like, oh, well, it doesn't make sense for them to be that dark because the Fremen aren't that dark. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Shut up. It's 10,000 years in the future. They can be whatever color they fucking want. Well, they were of Middle Eastern descent. It's like, not all of them. Not all of them were. It doesn't matter. Um, if you want to get upset about something in the Villeneuve one, get upset about the fact that Channy is being kept in the dark about what Paul is trying to do. And so she has all the appearances of being like, oh, he doesn't love me, Herbert. And it's like, no, that's not actually what's going on. In the book, he makes it pretty abundantly clear exactly what the score is. Unfortunately, Channy is a criminally underdeveloped character in the books. But even with that complaint, given the information that she has been given that we, the audience, see, it makes sense that she'd be kind of miffed. Unfortunately, it makes making a Dune Messiah movie kind of problematic because now you have to burn time getting her back on side and being his concubine type thing. Um, or actual wife. Not legal, not princess wife, but the other one. You know, the one he has kids with. That one. Sorry, spoilers for a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, very old book now. I say very old. It's not book. Oh, it's book, not. We're having one of those days. Spoilers. But Paul Atreides has kids. Shocker. I know there's like a whole book called Children of Dune, but it could have been a metaphor. It is actually a metaphor and literal at the same time. Crazy. Um, have I mentioned I could like harp on how brilliant the overall story arc of that series is? I could, in fact, go on for hours, which is probably why I won't be reading it aloud. Also, because there's full cast recordings of certainly the first book and better record and actual good audiobooks of the rest of the series. Um, uh, and I highly recommend you find some of those because they're really good. They're better than I'll ever do, and I'd be comparing myself to it all the time. And no, no. I don't need that hanging over my head. I had a point. It's gone now. Call me dull. Yep. Anyway, that's our blather. So, in summary, hope people are enjoying the Lazarus effect. It's it's kind of mellow. It's kind of more about the characters and like the general environment they live in. Like that's the cool idea being explored. The cool ideas being explored, but also there's like how do humans interact. A kind of a recurring theme of the Pandora sequence is people in conflict with each other for various reasons, and the different reasons they can be in conflict with each other. And you can say it's about finding a better way. You can say it's opining on what a better way would be if you want. It's definitely about how do we as people, being as different as we are, from different backgrounds, different maybe we have different goals and we have different appearances and whatnot. How do we get along basically, so that we're not constantly at each other's throats and tearing ourselves down. Which, I guess, when I think about it, is maybe one of the things I like about it so much. um, which isn't to say I'm like a bright-eyed idealist by any stretch of the imagination. I frankly think that it's gonna be it's totally impossible for us to make it a utopia at this point, but a body can dream. Um, but I nonetheless thoroughly enjoy reading about it in fiction because A, it's fun, and B, it means that we can think about such things, and that shows a certain degree of determinism. Us being like, hey, we can conceive of a better way. Why don't we just do that? And reality is facing that, yeah, we can conceive of a better way, but just never, ever, ever, ever seem to do that. Anyway, I had another point, but it's gone now. At some point, I'd like to read a bunch of things. Right now, since I'm going to be setting up for Down Below Station, and I don't realistically have time to reread it. Um, so we will kind of wing it. It's been a while since I've read that, but it has been in the last 10-ish years, I'm pretty sure. So hopefully I'll remember certain things. It's going to all come back to me as time goes on, sadly. Um, I'm also gearing up at some point this year to do a reread on my own of Endymion by Dan Simmons, so we can finally wrap that up. And I do need to do a refresher on that one because I've read it maybe twice. Have I only read through that once? No, surely I've read through that twice. I can't remember when the second time was. It's been a while. Not that long, but a while. That's also in the last 10 years, but I can barely remember it, so I need to reread that. And so after I've done that, advance a couple months down the clock so I have time to let it percolate and I can feel voices in my head. Feel the voices of the characters in my head more organically. Um, then we can get that cracking along. Uh, One book I definitely want to interject in at some point because it's so much fun is a book I can't remember the title of, so don't worry. I think I can see it from here. Let's squint, shall we? Oh yeah, Endymion's going to be great. Endymion's going to be good times. Blech. Where are you? Is that it? It might be it. Give me a sec. It is a book entitled Space Opera by a person whose name I just saw and vanished from my skull box. By Catherine M. Valenti, sorry. The tagline of the book is In space, everyone can hear you sing. It is, it's Space Eurovision. It is fantastic. It is a great book. I thoroughly enjoyed it when I read it a couple of years ago. I was like, this is the best. It's very, very, very Hitchhiker's Guide. It takes all the right notes from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It is very enjoyable in that regard. If you are down with something like Hitchhiker's Guide, that is one that you will thoroughly enjoy. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to come up with a decent singing voice, and I can do that. But it's going to require practice. Anyway, good times, says I. Good times. Yep, that's it. That's my blithering for the day. Um, as always, Hope you enjoyed. Also, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. I will see you all on Monday. Oh, right, that's the other thing. My brain has been actively avoiding it. Um, I will not be here next Friday. Uh, so it'll just be Monday and Wednesday next week. The week of March. Uh, March 10th and March 12th. I will be here, but I will not be here for the 14th. I should be back by the next Monday, though. So I should be back by the 17th. Um, but that's it. So yeah, stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other, and I will see you all next time.